16 years ago, after I had originally discovered about my father's HD status in 1994. So then 16 years ago, I discovered that I too was carrying the expanded Huntngton gene. The neurologist who gave me that result said, there's nothing that you can do about this disease, just live your life as well as you can. Wrong. In the process of swapping war zones for the battlefield, countering the stigma and prejudice surrounding HD, I discovered that in fact, the reality is there's everything I can do about the disease, not just for the HD community, but also myself. And as I will explain, crucially, those two goals overlap. Okay, so let's move on now to the March of last year. It does actually seem a lot longer ago somehow, doesn't it? When in the depths of COVID lockdown, we had a shocking piece of news from Roche, the pharma company. The trial of their ASO drug called tominersen was stopped because in some participants, symptoms had got worse. The result amongst the global HD community was a kind of communal grief, not anger, but just a sort of stunned, silent incomprehension. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is to explain how, whilst that may have seemed like a terrible moment in the history of our disease, not least for someone who, like me, was one of those being dosed with tominersen, in fact, that moment was not something that you need to regard as a cause for anxiety or grief at all. Okay, so how do I come to that conclusion? Here we go. The first reason is the fact that, as is often the case, the results of the trial were not how they appeared at first. And here we have to understand how pharma and drug development works. It's something I certainly knew nothing about 16 years ago. It turns out that there's never really a simple path between a great idea and you and me receiving a treatment. So here I have to mention an annual conference called the Huntington's Disease Therapeutics Conference, which is organized by an American charitable foundation called CHDI. Now, there are many remarkable things about this conference, which make us so lucky to have the people who attend it from every corner of the world on our side, not least the inspiration brought by the lifelong commitment of so many of the world's most talented scientists in a uniquely collaborative field. But there are many other unique aspects of the HTTC, so many that I don't have the time to go into them at all today. But luckily there is a short film which does just that. And if you haven't seen it already, I know that you have been given the details of where to see it. It's called Hoping Machine. And in that 1 hour film, there are also lessons. And one of those is that drug development is hard and progress is always incremental. So let's get back to Roche. It was at the CHDI conference this year that they announced that in fact, in that trial, some participants did show some improvement. Although, to coin a phrase used by pharma to ensure that they don't overpromise, not statistically significant, it was enough to warrant a new trial. And that's the crucial bit here. These trials cost tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to put on, remember? And Roche would not throw that kind of money away if they hadn't seen something in the data. They explained in their interview with me, which you can watch in my postcard from Palm Springs, also on the same website that the Hoping Machine is on, that the dosing had been too high in the first trial. And then that same team from Roche announced at the EHDN conference in Italy 2 weeks ago that the new trial will begin at the beginning of next year with 360 participants around the world, including sites in the UK. So tominersen, and more importantly, Huntington lowering, the so-called principle of so many treatments being pursued by other companies, is well and truly back in the game. And in our collaborative HD world, where we are all pulling in the same direction, this turned out, therefore, to be far from an unexpected speed bump, not a brick wall, and a bump which we all learn from. At the end of the film Hoping Machine, I added the only change that I felt was required in the light of the Roche trial news that happened just weeks before that film was first shown. And that was the words, "All information empowers us." You see, we must let these companies make mistakes. In fact, they need to know, that is the pharma companies, that they have to have the courage and the wisdom to know that mistakes have to be made and used to climb upward like broken bricks piled against a wall. So this is where I should mention something else I've worked out in the last 16 years. And that is, we should forget that word, that first word I read about to describe HD back in 1994, incurable. That is a meaningless and redundant word. Almost nothing in medicine has been cured. Not cancer, not HIV, not influenza, not the common cold. What we have learned to do is manage the symptoms of those diseases. No one is going to come along with a magic wand and present a cure for HD in one moment of glory and go and collect their Nobel Prize any more than any other disease. That's simply not the way it works. The reality, though, is far more positive, because instead of waiting for a non-existent fairy to appear, we are already now in a process of enacting what is effectively a cure, finding ways to manage HD, and that includes not just drugs. There are many more myths about HD than any other disease. For example, say the one that says people with HD are all underperformers that drain society's resources, when the reality is people with the expanded HD gene have more gray matter, better motor skills, and until they get sick, are consistently higher achievers than people without it. But there's another, even more significant myth, not one told about people with HD, but to us. And that is, there's nothing that can be done for people with Huntington's disease. Their condition is untreatable and they have no power to improve their lives. Now, this is where I need to introduce you to two phrases. One I call the data ditch, and the other is environmental enrichment. And to explain environmental enrichment, I need to tell you the story of some HD mice I learned about at a research lab in Vancouver. So these HD mice were separated into two groups. One went into a cage with nothing to do, no tasks, constant light, just occasional food, and boring, boring, boring lives, okay? Another one went into a cage. Another group went into a cage with all sorts of stuff to do, with wheels to run around, and they could, turn lights on and off and win prizes of food and that sort of thing. And that latter one was called the environmentally enriched group. So they were just having more fun, more stuff to do, okay? Now, the environmentally enriched mice lived 40% longer than the ones who did not have environmental enrichment. Now, we don't have that kind of data for humans, and I'll explain more about why that is in a moment, but I believe it would be highly illogical to suggest that if that happens to mice, the same thing would happen to humans. The problem is that we can't really work out precisely what would constitute environmental enrichment for humans, who are mostly, at least, not all of them, more complex than mice. Also, the other problem is, how would researchers ever work out what would they call a control for a human trial? So basically, it's impossible. We can't have human data for this. So this is where what I call the data ditch comes in. Because there's no data for humans to suggest environmental enrichment benefits, unlike the mice for humans, no professional clinician or doctor or scientist can even suggest that that is the case. Now, I can say that because I am not a professional clinician, but a lay family member. Now, of course, it's entirely your right to say, well, you know what, I only want to listen to the professionals. Absolutely. But for what it's worth, this is what I firmly believe, that environmental enrichment benefits people in my situation, and a lack of it makes things get worse. And I also believe that what constitutes that environmental enrichment for humans varies between people. For example, for some people, it may be more work. For others, it might be less work. But what I am certain is that getting good sleep, lowering excessively stressful situations, and engaging with other more positive situations and people will benefit. And here we come to the stress that my father must have gone through, hiding the disease away for so long, just as his symptoms were getting worse. His generation and earlier ones certainly did go through horrible experiences of stigma, which compounded the need to feel that they should hide away their HD status. But times are changing fast, and at least in so-called advanced countries like here in the UK. I have sometimes been contacted by people around the world who say to me, I'm kind of keen to come out of this, this hideous HD closet, but I'm worried about how my neighbors or my employers might react, that they might, shun me in the way that people did when my father was a child. I say to them, well, actually, I think that in 2022, you may be very pleasantly surprised. And you know what happens? They tell their neighbors and their work colleagues, and more often than not, overwhelmingly, those people who are their neighbors and colleagues say things like, oh, my goodness, that's terrible. Is there any way that we can help? Tell me more about the disease so we can understand it better. You see, we really are in a different world, and people generally are better people than we realize. So I believe the downside to being more open is definitely less daunting. But is there an upside in the absence of any real treatments so far? Well, I have no data, obviously, but I firmly believe that the difference between hiding the disease away, like my father did, and being open with it, like me, or even better, engaging in one of the many organizations that we now have at our disposal, like HDO and HDBuzz and Enroll HD, will slow your disease progression in the same way that a drug might, for example. And remember, none of these, drugs or environmental enrichment, is going to be a single magic wand to make HD go away. That's not what we're trying to do here. We want to get to the point where, like with HIV/AIDS, we can live a long life with good quality of life with HD. Now, of course, I am in a sense largely preaching to the converted here, because just by listening today, you probably made a step in the right direction. But we all know people in this situation. Without appearing smug, you might just want to let that person know that this is something they might want to think about. But whatever the benefits of environmental enrichment as one of our tools, still the most obvious incremental change to our situation, and the way for more people to be encouraged to not hide the disease away, is for more advances in drug therapies. And this playing field, it happens to be the case, is streets ahead right now of any other disease. And that is because of the exponential graph of understanding of our disease right now, which is born out of a global collaboration between researchers and families, one unprecedented in medicine. Because collaboration has created a snowball effect unique to HD in recent years, where each discovery brings another series of avenues of exploration. And again, have a look at the postcard from Palm Springs, which you now know how to access, just to see how many shots on goal we have now for therapies really coming close. And it's not just, listen, in Palm Springs that scientific progress is happening. I am privileged enough to see how extensive the advances in this global collaboration are around the world, from robotic arms in Boston making the process of chemical manufacture for HD treatments far more precise, to new artificial intelligence methods speeding up MRI imaging for HD Huntngton's in London at IXICO. And that's just in the last few weeks of visits that I've made. This is going on all over the world. And because of this brilliant and coordinated work, we in the patient community have reached a critical point. That critical point is that for the first time in the history of Huntington's disease, there are unknown variables ahead. That is, think about this, where the future graph for HG gene carriers is no longer unremittingly downward like it was for my father and my brother and everyone in the past. Think about this. This is not just a percentage improvement, but an arithmetical absolute. The difference between nothing and the possibility of something. The difference between variations in the rate of decline to the chance that there might just be a year when the graph moves up. And I believe it will. And we have come this far, think about this, in 16 years. We basically were nowhere 16 years ago. Imagine where we can get in another 16. Okay, John and Roisin, questions, please.
Yeah, we've got a question just to say to anyone, if it just pop any questions you've got in the chat or on the question and answer box. But we've got a question here, Charles, saying, my question is, how can I best support my friend who has recently been diagnosed with HD?
Okay. Okay, so this is from someone who's not from an HD. I'm just assuming that this is someone who's not suffering from HD or in their family, but with a friend.
Yeah, so someone outside of Huntington's family asking how he can support his.
Yes. Okay, that's a very good point, and this is something which we really need to understand. Okay, the first thing is to support your friend. Make sure that that person understands, first of all, that this is nothing to be ashamed of. It's a disease. It is not something that a social disgrace. This is something which can be dealt with, and there is a great deal of there's first of all a wonderful community around the world which that person can become part of, but there's also a wonderful collaboration going on right now, which never used to be the case, including pharmaceutical companies and all sorts of other not-for-profit organizations who are working on making this disease manageable. It is not hopeless anymore. It was, there was a vacuum of hope. There is now all sorts of reasons to be hopeful, and we will be able to put it one way, another way, what I said at my first HD summer camp, when I went there of HDO summer camp, when someone asked me there, a young lady said, "Tell me something you know for certain," and I said, I'd never thought of it before, but I just said there and then, No generation, yours included, will ever have to fear this disease as much as mine did. And that is true. Still true, ever more true, ever more truer every day.
Thank you. Got another question here, Charles. I just wonder if you could talk a bit more about the Hidden No More Foundation, about what, because I think quite a few people won't necessarily know what that is, or why it was set up, or what it does.
Okay. Yeah, so what we do, what the Hidden No More Foundation does, which is not what any other HD organization, actually, you know what I'll do? First of all, I need to explain what other HD organizations do. So we have organizations that are scientific organizations like CHDI, and there are other ones, you know, the HSG in America and other organizations like this. Now, what they do is they solely concentrate on scientific advances in therapies. And that's what they are there for. We also have then the family organizations that, like the HGA and the Scottish HGA and the Irish Family Organization, but also, like, for example, in the United States, the Huntington's Disease Society of America, and so on. And these organizations are there to support families in whatever way that they can. They're not really there primarily to bring about scientific progress, but what they are there to do is to communicate to families, and communication is incredibly important now. You know, where we have been able to advance so much in the last decade is with the benefit of social media, and that is where so many of these organizations have thrived so well. Now, so that is what those organizations like the HGA, HGSA do. We also have, by the way, some other organizations that are slightly more specific, like, for example, HD Buzz. HD Buzz is an extraordinarily brilliant website which gives better research news to families about what is happening in the scientific world than any other disease. It's an extraordinarily good and useful tool. And we also have HDYO, which is for young people. So those are the organizations that exist already, but they all have specific you know, roles. HDYO is to try and help young people, you know, who are affected by HD, and so on. What the Hidden No More Foundation does is what none of those other organizations correctly feel is their, you know, is their task, because they are busy enough with their extremely important work that they also do. But what the Hidden No More Foundation does is to simply address the problem, the single problem, which is that why is it that this disease, more than any other, means that the vast majority of people who suffer for it have to feel they have to hide the disease away. Now, that doesn't happen with any other disease, not even leprosy, none. You know, there is no, it used to be, you know, that there were other diseases that people were ashamed of, even cancer, believe it or not. You know, was something in my childhood that people were embarrassed about. But there is no other disease for which there is the extent of the disease being hidden away. And that is not only, it's bad for everyone. It affects every aspect of the disease badly, because it affects the government funding, because people don't realize just how common it is, and it's far more common than people realize, for example. It also affects research, because, of course, you know, we've done amazing things with the collaboration around the world with 10 or 15% of the families who have the disease. But imagine if we could get more people involved, what we could do, you know? So it affects that. And it also, as I was saying just a little earlier, I absolutely believe affects the disease progression itself, because of, you know, the stress that it causes those people who are going through that process. So the Hidden No More Foundation was started basically as an idea that I had back in 2010 when we launched the all-party parliamentary group in the UK into Huntington's disease under the Hidden No More banner. And then that initiative, that Hidden No More initiative, took on a much more global sense when in 3 years ago, the Pope Francis became the first world leader to publicly embrace people with the Huntington's disease and said to a global TV audience, this is now time for the world to realize that Huntington's must be hidden no more. This is not just a slogan, he said, but a principle we should all embrace. So that was, as well as being a moment of great pride for me to have the leader of more than 1 billion Catholics, say those words, but it was also a really truly historic moment for our disease. So that's Hidden No More. The foundation and its purpose is to enable everyone to feel that they have no reason to hide the disease away.
Thank you, Charles. We've got lots of questions coming through. We've got one here. It's someone saying that they've fallen in love with a man who has Huntington's. He's been so isolated and is a very bright and courageous man, and saying about, could he please be involved in any trials and medications, and where could we find out about this, please?
So where could that person find out about
trials?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a good question and understandable. I'm glad that they want to engage in that. And so there are various ways that can happen. The simplest is to first of all just approach your local Huntington's disease association. So if you're in Wales or England, that would be the HTA, which is based in Liverpool. And if it's in Scotland, it would be the Scottish Huntington's Association. And then we have also our colleagues in Northern Ireland and in Ireland. So the first thing is, depending on where you are in the UK, to go to them. Other than that, because they will be able to advise you. Other than that, there is an it's not really an organization, it is a sort of a data setup called Enroll HD. And you can, that's enroll with 2 L's -HD, and you can simply go to that on the internet, and that basically is the coordinating point for all people, not necessarily who would want to necessarily be part of a clinical trial, although that would be the first step to doing it, but that's just for people who to take the first step of becoming involved in the research community by basically putting themselves onto a database where they will help us understand the disease better, and thereafter, find people who are correct, who were the best candidates for clinical trials. But the good news is that now, unlike 16 years ago when I first did this, now there are extensive clinical trials in disease-modifying drugs, potentially disease-modifying drugs. And what I mean, what's disease-modifying means, by the way, is it's not just affecting the symptoms, but actually the rate at which the disease progresses and starts. So these are very significant trials, and they are hiring right now for those trials. Now, obviously, they have various different criteria for the different trials, so not everyone suits every trial, but there are so many going on, and starting up and in the UK and around the world, that this is an extraordinarily unprecedented time for scientific advance. And I would also suggest have a look at, if you haven't seen it, have a look at that postcard from Palm Springs that I mentioned, which talks about a lot of the the trials that are coming up in progress.
Great. Thank you. Just to say, Charles, we can put the link to Enroll HD along with a few other things in our follow-up email to people who've attended, so we can pass that bit of information on. But the next question we've got is a more personal question. It's saying, I've recently been diagnosed with carrying the HD gene. This was 8 weeks ago, so still very fresh in our minds. My main concern is my emotions and feelings at present. I'm 40 years old and then a father of 2 boys. I felt the lowest of my life recently. Is this something you can relate to yourself?
Completely, yeah, totally. I was 40 when I was tested, and when I first discovered about the disease in 1994, I was 34 when I first heard of it. I didn't get tested immediately because, well, my brother did. My brother John did. The brother that I knew, he tested positive straight away. I didn't because, you know, I sort of followed the same path that so many people do, which is to think, well, you know, there's no need for me to be tested. There were no obvious reasons in terms of therapies being available. So I kind of put it off, which was fine. You know, there's no right or wrong time to be tested. And by the way, when I suggest, you know, to people that get involved here, I'm not saying at that point get tested. I don't think, you know, I don't like, you know, go around saying, God, everyone should be tested. Not at all, not at all, because you don't have to get involved with this collaboration and put your head above the parapet. You don't actually have, that doesn't mean you've got to be tested at all. It's just that if we can all, the more people that we know about who are in HD families, that, you know, the better it is for all of us to, apart from anything, for everyone to then feel that they're not alone. So anyway, so yes, 40. I didn't get tested at 34. When I was 40, the same age as the person asking the question, I thought at that time that I needed the benefit of having some direction in my life, empowerment, you know, the empowerment of information, and there is no question that, you know, it does empower. That information does empower, but of course, you know, in my case, it was, you know, the wrong, you know, result, if you want to look at it that way, and I'm sad that is also the case, and I could so feel for you, but what I would say is that you have now made that's the hardest step, you know, that you can now it's not going to, you know, that now it's not going to be so difficult, because now you can now make decisions that can benefit and empower your whole family, and you can enable yourself to become involved in this collective story of progress, you know. And this is that's the great thing about now, is that we are in a position where we're progressing, which has never been the case, and we're progressing in every sense of the word, and, you know, we're understanding so much more about this disease, both in terms of the amazing scientific advances, but also every other way. And, you know, I certainly completely understand how difficult it is for you, but you must understand also that you know, knowledge is power, and we are moving forward in ways that no one would have imagined possible, even 15, you know, or 20 years ago.
Thanks, Charles. The next question says, hi, I also have the HD gene. You mentioned avoiding extreme stress, but I have been doing high adrenaline things from my bucket list that make me step out of my comfort zone to raise funds and awareness. So in brackets, skydiving, wing walks, etc. Do you think that inducing stress in these situations that result in pleasure, do you think that's okay?
Yes. Yeah. No. You don't. No. You shouldn't misunderstand. When I say stress, I don't mean. I mean, listen. I used to get. I've had. My share of being blown up and shot at, and in war zones and that sort of thing. I don't think that's not stressful. Weirdly, and nor is all that wing stuff. Like wing walking and jumping out. All that stuff. That's not stressful. That's fun. No, what I mean by stress is having some really annoying like boss who's like just making your sort of everyday stressful. That kind of thing. No, I think no. I mean, no. More the better. More skydives the better. I think. I mean. See, that's why I think we've got to always think very openly about this environmental enrichment and what I mean by that. And so for example, as I said, for some people, it might mean less work. For other people, it would mean more work because they need to be engaged more. It's not always the case that, I'm not saying at all that basically what I want is that people just then sit around and not do anything. Oh, no, far from it, the opposite. A lot of people ask me about drinking alcohol, and oh my God, should I not drink? No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that, for example, and this is me saying this, you won't hear a doctor say this, obviously, but I can because I don't have to follow any rules or any data, and I think actually I say better drink down the pub than not drink at home on your own. Definitely, any day. That going to the pub and having and being around other people and maybe having a chat and a laugh or something, or even playing some, I don't know, pub quiz or something. I mean, that's far better for you to do that and have a couple of pints than not drink at all. So, I think that we have to think very open-mindedly about this. And yeah, no, I think that sounds like a great idea. That's not stressful. Annoying people are stressful.
We've got the next question. I would appreciate any advice on how to support a gene-positive sibling who doesn't want support and isn't able to see that they're having cognitive difficulties.
Yeah, that's, well, okay, the cognitive difficulties are, okay. That denial is very, very common. And first thing to understand is you're far from alone in that. As all of our wonderful experts at the HTA or the Scottish or Irish organisations can confirm that one of the difficult things about HD is a denial, whether it be of cognitive or any other aspect, any of the other symptoms. That is very common, and I think that really what the first thing that you have to do is, I believe, is to try and persuade. Sorry, was it a friend or a relative? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
I think it was a relative.
Yes, your sibling, right?
Sibling, yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, to try and persuade your sibling to just be in a safe place, first of all, not to persuade, but just to ensure that they are in a safe place all the time, and that the whatever the denial is creating is not going to actually put them in danger, because that can happen. And once you've done that, to then be supportive and then engage with the problems in a way where they can. The first thing would be to get help from your local organisation, if it's in the UK, if it's in the England or Wales, the HDA. What I would say is that for this specific problem of denial, this is something which is really a difficult issue, which is almost I wouldn't say unique to HD, but it's probably worse than any other disease, denial, and it is something that I can completely. I've seen it, in so many cases, and it's something that we can we can deal with collectively, and we need to be able to try and address in a way where we are supportive, because it's not it's not going to lecturing or being seen to be trying to be holier than thou. It's not gonna work with HD people. So I understand it's not easy, denial, but you've just got to be patient.
Charles, I have a question as well. So it seems to me that, in your journalism career, and you spent years and years sort of seeking the truth and then highlighting the truth and communicating the truth. And then now, post your journalism career, you're continuing to do the same thing with Huntington's disease, and you're applying the skills that you learned and the networks and everything to do that with Huntington's disease. So how, as someone who's sort of driven by that need for truth, how did you feel then when you realized that in your very own family there were so many secrets and maybe lies, and how did you respond to that?
Well, it was shocking, it really was. And the only way that I think the way that I best dealt with it, I think, was by realizing, as I have done by meeting so many other people, with the disease in their family, who have been through similar nonsense, that my family was not alone, at all. I mean, it is uncanny how just like, so there are so few people, I mean, around the world who have been completely honest about this disease. So few. I mean, of the hundreds I've met, I could probably sort of, of the ones who are sort of in, I think that, in kind of backgrounds like ours, in advanced countries, I think that, of the ones who've been completely honest, I could probably count them on two hands, Yeah. Everyone else has had some kind of denial. And I think everyone listening would recognize that is the case to a greater or lesser extent. So that was what enabled me to kind of, get over the fact that my family had done this. I mean, because it was pretty, it was pretty shocking, to discover that I had this poor guy, my brother, half brother, who I'd never seen, who had been on his own, because of all of this nonsense about, hiding the disease away. I mean, I think, and again, but I do think that there's a generational thing here. I think that my parents were, part of that post-war generation where, they were very kind of, shy and was, sort of typical middle-class reserve of the, of a British person, which made it all worse, and I do think that the situation is now really, really different. And I think that, that now we all have the opportunity to have a different way, to show a different way, because there are so many reasons now for us not to feel that we need to hide it away. But we just need everyone to understand that,
Yeah.
It's not as bad, it really isn't as bad as you think it's going to be if and when you do say, okay, actually, we've got this in our family, and And the truth is always, always helps. I've never encountered one family ever where where being more open about the disease has had a bad effect on them. Not once. There's not one. It's always improved things. No, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. And I don't mean, oh my God, you should feel bad if you're still, not at all. It's completely understandable. But what I would encourage people is to do it, learn more about the disease, and then, in due course, I believe that, you will sort of realize that actually what seems impossible is not so impossible.
Thank you.
Charles, we've got another question here saying that the profile of MND has risen in recent years due to some former sports people being unfortunately diagnosed with it. And do you believe that the profile of Huntngton's would increase further if famous people were diagnosed with HD?
Yeah, well, yes, that is true. The reality is, this is the kind of, where we are. The reality is that there are many people, because as I was mentioning, in fact, people with HD tend to be very high achievers. And in fact, there are many people who are, very high up in, whether it be the judiciary or, other, areas of life, who have Huntington's in the family, and we don't know about them. And as and when, I think what will happen, I'm very positive. I think this is going to be okay. We're all going to be okay, honestly, because, as everything improves for us, in terms of, all of these aspects, and more people will realize, oh, first of all, this weird disease that, has been hidden away by everyone, including the, society, including the authorities, because they couldn't be bothered to deal with it because they didn't know how to treat it. And, doctors don't like treating things, dealing with things that they can't, fix. So, the more this cycle works, that we kind of more people, they realize that these people are out there, that they're not, they're not devils, they're not demons, they're not witches. They're just people with a disease, which is actually quite a complex one in many ways, apart not least in us, in terms of its social role. The way, the more that we all just realize that, the more that actually people will then say, okay, there's no reason for us anymore to hide this, away, and let's be open about it. But of course, yeah, always, sports people are certainly becoming vocal about the, especially in things like American football and rugby and soccer, football, our football. With head injuries and so on, realizing that this is something they need to be aware of, but they've got a very good high profile anyway, so they're able to do that. Similarly, when I talked about HIV/AIDS as being the sort of template for where I think we should be, I think that what was crucial with that was the fact that they were able to cut through so much tape. They were kind of the forerunner of what we did with COVID, with what the world did with COVID, which is to say, okay, we haven't got time for all the normal nonsense and a red tape and official this and FDA that and EMAs that. We need to just make this work, and we did it. The world did it with COVID. With the vaccinations, and before that, HIV/AIDS did it, because they had an extraordinarily, impressively vocal backing amongst people who were so high profile that they just got it done. And if we had that, now we could get this done. But we're getting there. and we are getting there. And you know, the further we progress with all of this, the more other people will be inclined to come out and put their heads above the parapet.
Great. We've got someone just make a comment here saying that hiding away also happens in dementia. Perhaps it's the fear of mental health issues more than physical, saying she used to take her mum out and people stared at her, and now they stare at her partner who has Huntngton's. This person saying they want to be an advocate for Huntngton's disease and they'll do all they can to help their partner, and saying thanks so much for tonight. We've got, I'm aware we're coming towards the end of our time, Charles. Would you have time to take a couple more questions? Do you think?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
We've got a question saying, it sounds like your HD diagnosis has empowered you and given you the drive to create change and achieve even more than if you hadn't tested positive. Do you ever regret being tested?
No, no, I don't. No, I don't. That's a very good question. A very, very smart question. No, I don't regret it. You know, largely for that reason, because, you know, I used to have a very interesting, well, fascinating career, you know, witnessing really, truly unique examples of how the human spirit, you know, manages to, you know, get through the worst situations. And I never really knew why it was, you know, what it was that connected all of those extraordinary experiences I had over 26 years, because they seemed like, you know, playing cards that were unconnected. And I have to say, in answer to your question, that by being, only because I tested positive, did I then embark in this, you know, new career, if you want to call it that, or this new mission. And in doing that, in doing so, I have not only discovered that you know, that those lessons of how great the human spirit are precisely mirrored in the extraordinary Huntington's disease community around the world, but that also those playing cards that that were unconnected now all have little suits and numbers and are all connected in one obvious mission. And it's really seems like, you know, all of my life was really a preparation for doing this. You know, and for that, I can only thank the, you know, extraordinary community around the world that surrounds this disease.
Great. And Charles, got one last question here saying, I think the phenomenon of looking in the mirror of your future self when you spend time with an HD affected family member is really common amongst people who are at risk of HD or who have tested positive. Testing positive myself and visiting my mum, who is in the advanced stages, is the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. Can you relate to this?
Oh yeah. You know, I always think of it as being like a conveyor belt. You know, that my brother and I, you know, saw. You know, my brother and I saw my father, you know, die in the way that we were, you know, going to, and I watched my brother do the same, you know, a couple of years ago. But this is where we're going to break that. You know, we're at the point where we can break that relentless cycle. We really can, because as I said earlier, we are at a point where we've never been before, which is that relentless decline, that relentless graph, that relentless conveyor belt is no longer the certainty. We now have the real certainty that the future can be changeable. That is, we've already got that far, and if we come together, we can ensure that happens sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much for that, Charles.
Charles, I just wanted to say thank you so much for tonight, and we've got some really nice comments that have come up already, with people sort of appreciating your insight and your knowledge, and also your sort of empathy and understanding for them. Yeah. And I also wanted to congratulate you on your OBE. and I know you've got a big day coming up quite soon. Do you know anything about that, or when it's going to happen?
Yes, I know it's at Buckingham Palace, and it's on the 12th, which is it's in 9 days' time, so just over a week from now, next Wednesday, at Buckingham Palace. I don't know if they don't tell you until the day before who it's going to be giving it, but it could be that it could be the first of the King Charles's investitures. So it is happening, but the important point about that is that not for me, although it's a fantastic honor for me, but the really important thing about that OBE is the fact that it was the first time that an OBE involved the words Huntington's disease in its naming by the Queen, which was then by the Queen. That was the first time that happened for Huntington's disease, and using those words, which is terrific. Following the wonderful Matt Ellison, who was an awarded MBE, it shows that we are really, in a new world for Huntington's disease. We're not the bad people that everyone thought we were.
Well, no, it's amazing news, and I hope you have a brilliant day, and you're going to share lots of pictures with us.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, well, Charlie, I think all that remains is to say thank you very much for tonight. We really appreciate you giving us your time, and I think, judging from some of the comments that we've got, that people have really appreciated it. So
thank you, John, and thank you, Rasheen, and thank you everyone for listening.